Hi, and welcome to this 7th video in a GUI-based approach to machine learning for sports betting. In this section, I'm going to take a look at hyperparameter tuning. Okay, let's get started. First of all, a quick mention about what hyperparameters are. We've seen some parameters here, input parameters like going, race value, the draw, and so on. These are features or input parameters that we are choosing to supply to our model from our input data. But there is another set of parameters known as hyperparameters. These can be thought of as under the hood parameters that control how a specific algorithm that you may be using will go about coming up with its predictions. So for example, with k nearest neighbors, one of the obvious parameters that can be tuned and changed for the k nearest neighbor algorithm is how many neighbors it will go looking for, and then base its voting on the k nearest neighbors. You can set that to maybe 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's an under the hood hyperparameter that you can play around with and change and tune. With gradient boosting, which is the algorithm I'm going to use here, we've got a number of hyperparameters. One would be, for example, the n-estimators hyperparameter. This is the number of trees, because a gradient boosting algorithm is based on decision trees, and the n-estimators hyperparameter will be the number of trees that it's going to use and as a basis for voting on the final prediction. So it would create a number of trees and, if you like, pool them together to create a prediction or a forecast. Now there are other parameters we can play around with as well, hyperparameters, and these under the hood hyperparameters is what we're going to look at today, and how we can tune them with MySportsAI. Now I've got a file loaded here. I'm just going to clear the input features and just select a couple of input features. We're not really concerned in this example about the performance of the model, so I'm just going to click on trainer in race percentage or ratio, and we'll go for, let's go for sire strike rate as well. Now if I go to create model, okay, in here, if I now click on hyperparameters, it'll tune the hyperparameters and find the best possible fit of hyperparameters rather than the default parameters, which we would get if I just clicked on create model. Now I'll click on that now. I've purposely used a very small file here, only about 140 races, because if you click on hyperparameter tuning, as I've just done, with let's say 7 or 8 years worth of data and maybe 6 to a dozen input features, it will literally take something like an hour to run. So it's not something you want to run when you're hanging around waiting for the results. It's maybe something you want to do towards the end of your development and when you're perhaps going for lunch. But with this small file, I can get some results back just as a means of a demo. I can get these results back fairly quickly, and we can see how we go about using them. Now, it's reporting back here that on the left here are the default hyperparameters. n-estimators is 40, max features is none, max depth is 3. And here's the results for the default hyperparameters. On the right, we've got the tuned hyperparameters. It's come up with the suggestion that the best set of hyperparameters are a max depth of 9, max features square root, and estimators 120. And here are the results for the tuned hyperparameters. Now if we were happy with this and wanted to use the tuned hyperparameters, we could then just say set params, and it will set the model to these hyperparameters here. And then if we were to go back and create the model, in this case using tenfold cross validation, it'll have run the model using the tuned hyperparameters that we just experimented with. Okay, that's it for this very short session. If you've got any questions, feel free to post. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much.